Well, thank you for all the wonderful organizers that have been mentioned, all those who have come to attend this time of thought and reflection together, and as Leslie beautifully presented, about really the cause of things and the reality that we live and what we can do about it on a personal level for our own personal growth and development and fulfillment and use of our all full potential, but also on a social level for addressing the problems that can face and are facing society as a whole, particularly now in terms of conflict and divisions, either politically, socially, economically, or even on a more expressed level, actually is spilling into conflict between nations and a lot of war and suffering. And we wonder what are the causes of these, and there are many specific causes that are there that are seen on the surface as socioeconomic belief systems that clash, regional tensions that have histories, and ethnic belonging, racial thinking, and all kinds of factors that are on the surface the expressions of something more profound. And that leads us to the questions we are hoping to resolve today in terms of what is reality and what can be done about it, and why humans are fighting the way they do, and why they're not living in peace. When we sit comfortably in our chair and think about it, we have many solutions that come to mind. Even facing the problems that are coming in the world that have many implications for our future on this planet Earth, such as artificial intelligence, the damage and problems that we face for the environment, the potential risks of genetic engineering. And many of these factors, they come and are there for very good reasons, and they have so much to offer in terms of potentialities of using what we can call laws of nature or greater intelligence in computing, but they have also their own risks. And so I invite you to be with me for a few minutes, 45 minutes or something, where I present a paradigm that allows us to afterwards discuss it together. So we'll make it an interactive, but you would certainly want to know why and what I'm talking about. So I'll start with a direct presentation, and then hope that whatever has not been completed during that presentation will be completed through our direct interaction. Let me ask you, please, first, because I know this is being addressed mostly to people who practice transcendental meditation. How many do not practice transcendental meditation or don't know what it is? So there are a few of us who don't know what transcendental meditation is or don't practice it. Since I will be alluding to it as one of the factors that are guiding to a solution, I'd like to start with a very brief introduction about transcendental meditation. Transcendental meditation is a consciousness-based technique, which means it's not a physical technique, it's not a technique for dieting or exercise, although diet, exercise, daily routine are certainly very important factors. But there is also our mind, and our mind is dealt with in terms of what is generally called for internal practice, so thinking and using the mind, as meditation, a meditation practice. Our mind manifests itself in terms of experiences, of thoughts, of feelings, psychology, impressions that we have. And we have our intellect, which is part of our thinking, discriminating ability that is nourished through training and teaching and education and going to school and learning and making decisions and analyzing things. So there is that analytical part, which is the intellect. There is that thought process, which is the mind. And all of these are actually on the background of our awareness. If we are not aware, we don't have thoughts, we don't have feelings, we cannot think if we are not conscious. So consciousness is a very fundamental aspect of our existence, which we take generally for granted. We are conscious, so what? And then the rest is what happens. It's like you have a screen and the screen is blank, there is nothing happening on it. But then when you have a movie, then the movie takes significance and takes the upper hand. And we forget that the screen is very important. Consciousness is more than just the screen of awareness, the screen of the movie of life that goes on, that we experience in different ways. But just as a primary analogy, we can say, as a metaphor, that the screen is very important, because if the screen is not clean, is not proper, is wrinkled, or does not reflect the light properly, then the movie is not experienced properly. And we have tended in general to ignore the screen for just the movie and the thoughts and the emotions that happen through what is going on in the movie. It doesn't mean the movie is less important, but it means we have ignored something which is fundamental, which is our awareness, our consciousness, and which can be very clear, very neat, very bright, or can be wrinkled, dirty, and not so obvious, and can have shades on it that kind of color our vision of things. And we know that because we go through different states of consciousness as we experience life. We have sleep, we have dreaming, in which we see things that are not real, but we think they are real during the dream. We have the waking state of consciousness, which can have different shades of drowsiness, alertness, clarity, broad perspective, broad perception, or limited, narrow perspective based on what we're facing. When we are in danger, our consciousness narrows down to the specific danger that is being faced. And we have what we call a fight or flight response. And this is reflected also in our brain when we see that even the blood flow goes to parts of the brain that deal with fight or flight, usually amygdala, limbic system, lower parts of the brain. And when we are relaxed and clear and settled and not feeling under pressure, we are able to see that the blood flow goes to the higher levels of the brain, which is the cortical areas, and particularly the frontal cortex, which deal with expectations, anticipation of the future, love and feelings and greater ideas, music, etc., are dealt with in that higher part rather than in the lower part. And so consciousness is a very important aspect of our daily activities, of our daily living, our enjoyment of life, our ability to see things in a proper perspective. In the same way as, for example, if you have colored glasses, you will see everything as the color of your glasses. If you have yellow tinted glasses, then you will see a white page as being yellow. If you have red, you will see it as red. And two people who have two different colored glasses, they will fight over the fact that one says the white page, one says it's yellow, the other one says it's red, and they're not lying. They are completely into it. They are completely authentic and have integration, but they don't know that they have the glasses. And oftentimes we see this in society, that based on prejudice, pre-exposure to stress and strain and problems, or whatever education we have had, whatever expectation we have had, we actually all wear some kinds of glasses, and we see the world through those glasses. And what is very important is to think how we can actually clear those glasses and make the perception of reality as real as possible. Transcendental meditation is a mental technique because it's called meditation, so it deals with the mind. And the term transcendental means to go beyond. And what do we go beyond? We go beyond all surface values of experience. So we can imagine the mind like an ocean. It has waves on its surface. It's a metaphor, just to have an idea of talking about it in that way. So your mind is like an ocean. It has waves on its surface, but it can go deeper and deeper within itself, has depths within itself as you go deep into your inner self. Usually we are on the surface of the ocean, experiencing the waves of the ocean and not knowing the dimensions that are deep. So a thought is like a bubble, we can say, that comes from the bottom of the ocean. It rises up, becomes bigger, and when it reaches the surface, we realize we have a thought. And we are usually going through thought after thought after thought in our daily activity. We don't know where the thoughts come from, but they can be creative, they can be stress-related, they can be of different kinds. And different techniques of meditation, they deal with putting attention on the thoughts. For example, contemplation, you take a thought, you think about it. Or concentration, you take some object, you focus on it, and you try to train the mind to be focused and not to go right and left, jumping around. Transcendental meditation is very different in the sense that it does not base itself on manipulating or guiding the mind in any way specifically. It allows the mind to settle down in the ocean of the mind and transcend, which means goes beyond the surface levels and experience deeper and deeper levels of our awareness, and finally experience a state which we call pure consciousness. Pure consciousness is a state of wakefulness, very alert state, but no thoughts are there. No thoughts, no memories, no emotions, nothing, yet there is wakefulness, there is very high alertness. And that is what we call pure consciousness, or consciousness of the self, the deep inner self. And what it has shown, what it was shown, is that as you transcend, which means as you go deeper, in the same way as in the ocean, the mind settles down, or the waves settle down, the activity settles down, the mind also settles down. It's more quiet, more quiet, more quiet, until it is fully settled and completely silent with no activity in it, no memories, as we said, no thoughts, no feelings, no ideas, no nothing, just experiencing pure being, pure consciousness. And that pure consciousness is what we call the self with a big S. This is our true inner self. I'll go through this more in detail through the lectures, through the talk that we have. But basically, that's what transcendental meditation is as a technique. It's practiced sitting easily, comfortably in a chair. And you don't have to have a special posture or change in your life. It's not a philosophy. It's not a belief system. What happens with it, with the settling of the mind, is that the body settles very deeply and gains very deep rest, and the result of that is adjustment of the body going back to its natural state. And we have seen improvements in health, in well-being, reduction in blood pressure, improvement in the immune system, reduction in hospital admissions, reduction in diseases, and greater survival, less heart attacks and strokes. For example, a 5-year follow-up study has shown that those who practice transcendental meditation regularly have 66% less heart disease and stroke and vascular problems related to changes in the physiology and the vascular problems by 66% and increased survival. It has also been shown that when a small number of people practice this technique together, they influence the environment. And this is something which is today also being studied in terms of what we call collective neuroscience, where we see that internal coherence in the brain for the individual increases with transcendental meditation. But we see also that people who interact with each other, they can have greater coherence among brains, between brains, so that different people, even sitting together or talking to each other, they can have exactly coherence in the brain, even though it's two different individuals, two different brains. So this is transcendental meditation, and it tells us a lot about consciousness as an approach to health and healing and well-being and social situations. Now, this is as an introduction to transcendental meditation, but it's part also of the evidence, if you like, of what I'd like to propose to you in terms of what ultimate reality is and how we can explore and use that ultimate reality to solve the problems that we have started by solving. If reality, and this now comes to be a little bit of a philosophical discussion about what is reality. If reality is all physical and material, which means there is some kind of energy that then appears as matter, and matter gets complexified and orderly and creates our nervous system. And then our nervous system as humans lead to consciousness or awareness. That is one idea of what reality is. So in reality, there are these two values, we can say. One is the material value, the physical reality of the universe. And one is the very personal, intuitive, subjective experience that we as humans have. So that part is called consciousness because that is the experience, the personal experience that is different from mechanical, physical aspects of reality. And so we can say that throughout history, there has been this question, what is actually reality? Are there two different things? One is, if you like, they can call it spiritual. Just to mean spiritual means non-material, non-physical, because what could it be? But we like to call it consciousness if there is something that is on the field of awareness or the field of consciousness. And then there is something else which is physical, the physical material value of our reality. If you think, or if the scientists think, which a lot of them think, that consciousness comes from the physical material getting complex and organized and then leading to a nervous system, and then consciousness suddenly appears, that's what we call the emergent idea about consciousness, that consciousness is emerging suddenly from the physical, material, mechanical world. And this is what we could call the physicalist point of view. Physicalist is those who believe that physical reality is primary, that's what it is, and that physical reality leads to the emergence of a new aspect which wasn't there before, ever, and that aspect is consciousness. So because science didn't deal with such aspects for a long time, it has been left to philosophy and belief systems. But suddenly scientists said, why should we just leave something as important as our consciousness, which is really the basis of our life, because without consciousness, there is nothing that has any value, because if we are not conscious, what does it matter if we are the most loved person in the world or the wealthiest person or the most knowledgeable person? If we don't have consciousness, we don't experience anything, we don't live anything, we kind of not mean anything. We are just a zombie or something like that, that is not experiencing anything. So all our life practically is lived through our consciousness. If we are in anesthesia, what does it matter that the whole world explodes or doesn't explode? If we are going to stay under anesthesia all our rest of our life, what does it matter? Anything. So anything matters or anything is important because of consciousness. And so the scientists said, we can't ignore something as important as that. Consciousness is very primary for humans. It's actually the most important thing, even though we take it for granted. And we know that our consciousness has different levels of its activity. It can be very narrow. Am I supposed to stop now? So, dream state of consciousness is also. So, therefore, scientists said, okay, what is that consciousness? We can't ignore it, We have to put people under anesthesia. We have to study their brains, see what's happening when they lose consciousness, where do they go, etc. And so in the past, maybe 20 years or so, not more than that, scientists have, for a long time they have been interested, but they didn't have the tools or the thinking or the ability to analyze it. So they have been trying to find what this consciousness is. And the assumption is that we know that the physical reality is absolutely real. Pinch yourself, you live in physical reality, you can't ignore that. And therefore, physical reality is real, and consciousness is real. That's what we call, if you like, in philosophical terms, the realism of consciousness and the realism of physicality. And so we want to know how they interact with each other. And already in the past, Descartes, who was one of the people that are often mentioned in this discussion, said, let's stop wondering about this problem. There are two things. There is consciousness on one side, the physical reality on the other side. They somehow interact with each other, and that's it. There are two things. That is the idea of dualism. Dualism means reality is made of two things. There is one spiritual aspect, and there is one physical part, and that's it, and they interact with each other. The question is how they interact with each other. How can something non-physical interact with something physical? And how something physical can influence something non-physical. And this became the mind-body problem. They call it the mind-body problem, which means how this mind and body interact with each other. When we say mind-body problem, we really mean consciousness and physiology, or consciousness and physical level of life problem. Now, for the past 30 years, scientists have tried to find a way to explain how consciousness emerges from the physical complexification of the nervous system. And today I can tell you there is not even a clue of how this can happen. Absolutely no idea. Even if you go to quantum mechanics, you go to the field effects and all that, you cannot explain how you pass from something physical, mechanical, into something that is subjective, personal, experience of the self, experience of love, experience even of joy or pain, experience on a personal level, not on a mechanical level. And so the scientists and the philosophers said there is a hard problem. That's a hard problem of consciousness. And it's a hard problem compared to the easy problem. The easy problem, which is one day we're going to discover exactly what happens when the light strikes my eyes and goes to where in the brain, exactly the pathway. We know which transmitters, which electrical activity, and then how the brain builds all this up. And then there is a recognition that this object is red. But that's the easy problem, even though the easy problem is very, very hard and still difficult to completely elaborate and sort out on all levels of the senses and the feeling and the experience and all of that, which means discovering how the brain really works in a very sophisticated way. And that's a research that's going to take years and years, and hundreds of years maybe, but maybe less with artificial intelligence explaining things. But still, that is the easy problem. The hard problem is how this is transferred into my appreciation of myself, looking at the red and experiencing red and the redness of the red. What does it do to me on a subjective level? And that is the hard problem. And so scientists have been researching this to try to see if everything is physical, how is it possible to come to consciousness? And as I said, there is no even clue of what this can be. And the duality problem that both exist and yet we don't know how they could possibly interact with each other is also a serious problem that has no answer. It is so much beyond possible answer, really, that no philosopher or scientist today really believes in this duality reality. They don't believe it could be possible. There must be some common origin to things. Okay? So David Chalmers, who coined the term hard problem of consciousness, and after years of scientific thinking and philosophical research, he said that one day somebody will come up with a crazy idea, and that crazy idea will explain consciousness. So I propose we have a crazy idea that will explain consciousness. And the crazy idea is that consciousness is actually primary. So consciousness is the source of everything. Now, the hard problem of consciousness, which is how can physicality lead to something non-physical, is being now turned on its head with a new problem. How consciousness, if consciousness is primary, leads to the physicalness. We can't ignore that this is physical reality. Now, this problem has been posed throughout history, and we know these people who believe that consciousness is primary, they're usually called idealists. Idealists, you can think of Plato, which thinks that there are forms and ideas, and then the ideas appear as different specific values. You can think of Leibniz and Spinoza, and even Schopenhauer in the modern times. But originally, the most complete idea about consciousness as being primary comes from an ancient knowledge from which actually meditation and yoga comes. And that's a Vedic, what they call Vedic knowledge. Vedic means referring to Veda. Veda means knowledge, and it's in the ancient knowledge of Veda. And particularly what they call Advaita Vedanta. Advaita Vedanta means that which describes reality as only one, and which has as its basis consciousness, and then everything emerges from that consciousness. But when the question is asked, how the material physical reality appear if everything is consciousness, but we live with chairs and mountains and people and feelings and pains and stuff, how do they appear? The answer usually has been, there is Maya, it's an illusion. We live in an illusion. Now, for scientists, this is not satisfying by itself, to say the least, because that refuses the realism of physicality, of the physical aspect of life. It's no more real, it's an illusion. The problem is in the interpretation of the term Maya has been the problem in this explanation of oneness at the basis of diversity, and that oneness is a field of consciousness. And then how can this manifest as the physical reality in the outside universe? Well, this is what I propose to solve in this book, that's Consciousness is All There Is, which is coming in August 6. I hope you will all get it. You can actually pre-order it. It discusses all these points and much more in terms of specifics about what are the implications of consciousness being primary. So now the solution. The solution in two words and few words is simply that consciousness is primary. And now we want to explore how consciousness can appear as matter. And what is the evidence from different angles that this can be the case? So we have to have evidence from empirical findings, which mean research. We have to have evidence from rational thinking, which means logic and common sense. We have to have evidence from this theory in terms of its what we call explanatory power. Does it explain anything that shows us what things are? Does it help us understand what we can do? And also from its application, does it lead to applications that are significant in our life? The reason we have to use all of these different aspects in order to demonstrate the validity of our paradigm that consciousness is primary, and not only primary, consciousness is all that there is, because if it's primary, whatever appears from it must be made from it. You know, if it's you like to say, well, if water was everything, then ice is also water, water is also vapor, is also originally water. So if you say that everything comes from consciousness, it means it is the substance, if you like, between quotation marks. It is the thing, the material, if you like, even though it's not material, it's not physical. It is the stuff that makes everything. That's why the conclusion, consciousness is all there is a necessary factor in explaining that, supporting that consciousness is primary. The other way to explain it would be to resort to supernatural phenomena. If you resort to supernatural phenomena, you're going to be in trouble with the scientist also. Because supernatural means you can assume anything, and therefore you're no more following the laws of nature, and you cannot give a proof on the basis of, for example, 1,000 angels sitting on the head of a pin, and each angel has their own mind and can control the universe, and they do what they like. So if you ask why this is so, you can say this angel is doing it. Why that is so, that other angel is doing it. That kind of explanation is not going to bring us together to a solution that is convincing in this world where we ask everything from the perspective of law and order and sequence and cause and effect. And having discovered that all these mystical, esoteric kind of thinking doesn't seem to hold when you examine and find that everything obeys laws, and laws mean cause and effect, etc. So if you want to bring a logic that is sustainable, that is supportable, that is evidence-based, you cannot resort to supernatural entity that can create something out of nothing in that way. Now, it doesn't mean this would not potentially exist, and I'm not discarding that possibility. I'm just saying that it cannot be used as part of your argument about ultimate reality. You can accommodate it, so you can allow it to exist within a framework. Why not? It's possible, and that is an additional explanatory power if your system allows something maybe of a different dimension than what we know today as humans, allow it to exist without resorting to it as an explanation for all that is happening, an explanation that doesn't really follow logical sequence of cause and effect and of reasoning in terms of what reality is, how reality emerges, and what happens. Okay, are we still together? Great. So now the key point about how consciousness appears as physical reality. And I'll give a few arguments. The first argument that allows us to think that this is potentially logical statement, because you have, when you present a theory, you present an axiom in mathematics, it has to make sense based on observation. You can't just imagine something and say, well, reality is like that. So first we want to start from physical reality. What is physical reality? If we can understand physical reality fully, we probably can have a hint or an idea about what is ultimate reality. Is physical reality as we see it through the eyes and hear it through the ears? Is this the final reality? Well, if you wake up in the morning and see the sun move from east to west, your physical reality is that the sun moves from east to west. This is true only on one level, the level of observations through the eyes. But if you look at the other planets and see how they're moving, and some of them go back and forth, because if you are the center of the universe, it will not make sense. And so you know the story of Copernicus and Galileo, who finally discovered that actually it's not the sun moving in the sky, it's only our senses that give us this impression, and it's actually the Earth rotating around its axis, and therefore that gives us the sense of the sun moving in the sky, and it's not moving at all compared to us. We are the ones that are moving, and the Earth is not flat, it's round, etc., etc. Now, these are superficial things, but as we kept looking at more detailed experience of our reality from the senses, we found that we have lots of limitations. For example, we see only colors or wavelengths of light from the red to the violet. We don't see infrared through the eyes. We don't see ultraviolet through the eyes. So what we see as real and colors in our environment is just how we are interpreting that reality. It's our perception, because we see only a certain range of things. Suppose we were able to see ultraviolet and we were able to see infrared, we would literally all look different to each other. Now, if we were able to see radio waves, which we know they exist because you take a radio, you turn it on, or your phone, and you tune it to something through a wave, and you can pick up the music, which means those waves are present here between us in a field. That is the field of electromagnetism, but we don't see them, we don't hear them, because our system sees only a very small part of the reality of the physical, whatever we're calling the physical reality, and we decide that is the final reality. But if our eyes were able to see at much higher frequency, for example, things might appear to be empty or might appear to be very solid, because all these waves that are now in the air, they would actually block our view of each other, because there are so many waves of electromagnetism and all other forces that are there, gravitational maybe forces or other kinds of forces that are floating around. So scientists recognize that, and they recognized also that we actually build reality from our own perspective, from our internal perspective. So reality is the combination of a trigger that comes from the outside and how we build it in our brain and the relationship that we have, and we say this is reality. And we see reality is localized, reality is here, is there. Okay, so what that does is already breaks in our understanding the sense of what reality is. That reality is not as rigid and fixed as our eyes show us or even our ears tell us. Dogs can hear at a different frequency. We hear only from 20 hertz to 40,000 hertz or something like that, around that time. that much. Don't quote me on the numbers. And therefore, there are vibrations and sounds in the environment that we don't hear happily. Otherwise, we can't make sense of anything. Everything will become very noisy. So on the sense level, even when you look at the touch level, when you look at different aspects of what our senses tell us, we are very limited in the experience of what true reality is. So the scientists said, okay, let's go deeper into what reality is. Let's take any object, and the Greeks started with that, divided into small pieces, and then we will know what is it made of. And they assume that when you reach a point where you cannot divide it anymore, you reach the smallest possible part. They call it atom, see, indivisible, atom, not divisible. And this is the smallest constituents. What is that smallest constituents? We don't know. They try to research it. But scientists in the past 100 and so years went deeper into the analysis of matter, and they found that even atoms can be made, or are made, not can be, are made of elementary particles. And as they kept looking deeper into the reality of physical reality, scientists came to something totally unexpected. They found that the elementary particles are actually vibrations of fields. There are fluctuations of fields, which means, like we said, we have an ocean and there are waves. These waves actually are what we call particles. They are waves on the field's level. They call this quantum field, and that's a quantum field theory, which says that when you reach the smallest parts, the constituents of physicality, the constituents of matter, you get into fields. And what is bizarre, and they call it even now the weirdness of quantum field theory and quantum mechanics, is that these supposedly objects are not localized at all. They are not present right here, right now, in time and space. They are delocalized, and they have the potential to be practically anywhere with certain probabilities. And these probabilities of being anywhere, they call the wave function of the field. And so when you look at an electron is not like a billiard ball. It's really more like a spread out cloud that localizes itself in time and space only when you observe it. And if you're not observing it, it's delocalized. So what did they do? They all found this bizarre thing, and they repeated the experiments over and over again, and it was indeed like that. If you don't observe it, it has a wave structure. If you observe it, it becomes a particle. And so they all went, the scientists, all these Planck and Bohr and others, and they went to Copenhagen, in Copenhagen, and they sat together and they scratched their head, and they came out with what they call the Copenhagen interpretation, which says that consciousness collapses the wave function. And so it has remained to be the possibility that something is happening with consciousness. But physicalists who don't want to accept consciousness as interacting with the physical material and it doesn't make sense, today have a different theory. They say, well, all of these different possibilities of the electron being here and here and here and here, they all coexist together, but in different universes. So that's the multiverse theory. We don't want to go there. We stay in our universe. So anyway, as they kept looking at these different forces and waves, today we have a theory of what they call the unified field, which takes all of these different waves or fields, like the field is like an ocean and it has waves, as we said, and they're supposedly different fields. So at the beginning, they saw there is electrical field, there is magnetic field, there is gravitational field, there is weak forces, strong forces, And all of them, each of them is a different kind of field. And they discovered, finally, as they kept going deep into nature, that these fields are more unified. So it's not that there is electricity on one side and magnetism on the other side. It's that electricity and magnetism are the same field, and they call it the electromagnetic field. When they kept looking deeper and deeper, then today we have a theory, doesn't matter the name, M theory or superstring theory, that says and explains that there is only one field at the basis of all that there is, and that fields appear as different fields, and those different fields then have their own fluctuations. They appear as particles. Those particles come together, they create atoms. Atoms come together, they create molecules. Molecules come together, they create cells, in our case, tissues, organs, organ systems, and then a whole physiology. So what we really are inside, deeply, if you look deeply, what we are made out of actually ultimately this field, which seems to collapse into an individual reality. This is interesting in our argument because we're saying that consciousness is a field and that there is one field at the ultimate reality. Now, the fact that there is a unified field does not prove that the unified field is a field of consciousness, but it does not contradict it either. And actually, it gives a hint through this Copenhagen interpretation that consciousness has something to do with it. So this first argument that I'm presenting to you is simply to say, if we look through the physicalist perspective, in the objective universe, what do we find? Ultimate reality is a field. And that field is a unified field, although not proved yet 100%, but there is a theory and all indicates that it is the case, that there is a field, and that field is one field. And that field is really a mathematical field. It's not like a physical field. And it has its weirdness. Its weirdness is one thing, is non-locality, which means your electron could be on Mars or could be in another galaxy. It has a probability to be there. And this is extremely weird. And suddenly it collapses to be like here in front of you. That's one weirdness. The other weirdness is what is called entanglement. Entanglement is particles when they come together, or if you create two particles out of one particle, and they have spin, they are rotating. One is clockwise, one is counterclockwise. In order to maintain balance of spin, they have to always be rotating in different directions. No need to go into the physics of it. It's not a physics lecture today. But the main thing is, what they found is that if the particles traveled very far one from the other, as soon as one particle turns its rotation from clockwise to counterclockwise, the other one turns its rotation from clockwise to counterclockwise, or the opposite, whatever is the opposite. And they studied it to see if there is possibility that this one is telling the other, come on, I'm going to turn the other way. Now please start turning so we maintain. And there is no way because the information would have to travel faster than the speed of light. And that is, according to Einstein theories and what we know, is impossible. So how these two particles know what to do with each other and to maintain neutrality of spin? That is a phenomenon called entanglement, which has scratched the head of big scientists, including Einstein, who didn't want to believe in it because he called it spooky action at a distance. But they repeated the experiment and repeated it under different conditions, different distances, and it seems that everything is deeply interconnected in a way that is unexplainable by physics kind of reality. And up till today, there is no explanation about how entanglement works. So there are these phenomena that are not explainable and that show us that there is something fundamental in nature that is different and that could at least support, if not be a strong evidence even for the paradigm we're presenting that consciousness is primary. Okay, so this is from the physicalist perspective. From the mental perspective, we have shown through scientific research, repeatedly, hundreds of scientific research, that the practice of transcendental meditation, which is only a consciousness-based mental technique, leads to individual improvement in health, in well-being, in behavior, in mental capacity. And also, when a group of people practice transcendental meditation together, they have a profound effect on society, leading to reduction in crime, reduction in hospital admission, even reduction in accidents of the roads, just because some people are transcending, which is going beyond the surface level. As we can say now, we can use the field effect. They're going to the field, which is non-local, and therefore they create effect from that side. And there are very well done, peer-reviewed, published research that shows this effectiveness of this technique, which means through consciousness we can actually create a different collective consciousness and lead to improvement in different social indicators. Now, the explanatory power. So these are evidence from observation, from analysis, from a physical perspective, and from the mental perspective. We have to still explain how is it possible that consciousness appears as matter. And this is what I would like to present to you briefly before we go into questions and answers. Imagine that field is a field of consciousness. And since it's a field of consciousness, its nature is to be conscious. That's why we're calling it consciousness. And to be conscious, it means it's conscious of something. What do you mean when you say, I am conscious? It means I'm aware of something. Now, this field is primary. This field is by itself. Imagine it was there before anything appeared. So let's take a travel in our mind, a thought experiment, to go before the Big Bang. Why we take this metaphor is just it's a simpler way to imagine a time when there was nothing. And imagine there, what is there before the Big Bang? There is that field, a field of consciousness. It is not material, it is not physical, it's just a pure field of being that is having a quality which is consciousness. It is conscious of itself. Since it is the only thing that there is, it's only conscious of itself. But its nature is to be conscious, and its nature is to be conscious in all possible ways it can be conscious. So it can be conscious in a small way, in a big way, in an infinite way, in an unbounded way. And so all possibilities of being conscious are present already in this field. To see what it can be like, we can use our imagination and say, okay, we are conscious human beings, and we can be conscious of anything we want to imagine, and therefore we can resort to our imagination. So you can imagine anything. You can imagine a unicorn, even if a unicorn doesn't exist. In reality, you can imagine it. You know, all the writers and fiction writers and movie makers, that is what they do for living, is to imagine things and let us, feel that it is kind of true. And they create objects and people and circumstances that are absolutely imaginary, that don't exist in our world, in our universe. And the more consciousness is broad, the more you can imagine things. If the consciousness is narrow, your ability to imagine is less. As you have bigger consciousness, you have ability to imagine more because you are more fertile awareness. Now, if even as human beings can imagine ourselves to be anything, they can imagine or think of ourselves or remember ourselves when we were young, when we were old. We can imagine ourselves in the future. We can imagine our circumstances. We can imagine we're living in a castle on Mars if we want to. We can imagine everything and anything we want. We can imagine Venus and Apollo, and we can, we can Zeus and whatever you like, you can imagine. And all of these imaginations are just virtual. Now, we as humans, compared to the infinite field of consciousness, we have kind of limited imagination in our day-to-day life, and still we can imagine all these things. Now, imagine that this infinite field of consciousness, how much imagination it can have. And it's sitting there by itself, imagining. So it's a field of consciousness that reflects on itself and is conscious of itself in practically an infinite number of ways. So what does it imagine? What are the things it imagines? It imagines mountains, maybe it imagines us sitting today in this hall because it has infinite fertile imagination. It imagines you wondering, where am I, what am I getting to, or is it going to last too long? When do we get to the questions? Or, or nodding and smiling, or not you nodding and smiling, the other one nodding and smiling, and you're wondering why they're doing that. You can imagine anything. And that field actually imagines all of these. So we are now, as we are here, we are already in the imagination of that field of consciousness. And that field can imagine us, every one of us, 10, 20 years younger, or 1,000 years older, or mixed up in this room in a completely different way. Or, us like this in this room, but this room is on planet Mars. Imagine, who knows whether it's true or not, But we know we are in Boston in the BU University from our perspective, so we don't have that problem because we observed ourselves and we are here and we know we are here. The other imaginations are only virtual. They are virtual. Okay, so to summarize, there is a field, and that field has all possible imaginations in it. So it can imagine you as the king of the universe or the queen of the galaxy or anything, absolutely anything. Infinite imagination. And it experiences all of this from its unbounded, infinite ability to see, and it knows that all of this is itself just imagining. These are the virtual realities present already in the fluctuations of that infinite field of consciousness. There is nothing material, nothing physical at all. It's just like us imagining different things, but it imagines in an infinitely more fertile way all different possibilities. So its nature, that field, is to know, of course. That is why we call it consciousness. Its nature is to be conscious. And to be conscious means to know itself from all these possible ways. Now the question comes, what is it it does not know? What is it it does not know? Anyone? Anyone who hasn't heard this lecture before?
It knows everything.
Yes, it knows everything. So why should there be any manifestation like we are here? Why would it bother?
Just to play, have fun.
To play, have fun is fun, but it's not it's an addition of a new factor, which is to play is an important thing, or to have fun is an important thing. We are just trying to be as simple in our concept as possible and base it on just one idea, that it is consciousness and its nature is to be conscious, and to be conscious in all different possible ways. So now it imagines all of these things. And what is it that it is not yet conscious of? What is it it doesn't know firsthand? Yes, it's in the right direction. It is curving back on itself. And by curving back on itself, it is thinking and examining and imagining all possibilities. But it is still itself unbounded, infinite. And it's seeing from this perspective. So we're talking about perspective. The perspective of this absolute pure being, if you like, pure consciousness, is infinite and unbounded. And it sees everything from infinite and unbounded possibilities. What is it it doesn't know? It doesn't know what it is like to see from a limited perspective. It doesn't know what it is like to see like you, like me, like a tree, like a star, like a planet. It doesn't know what it is like to actually put itself in the shoes of small, limited individual entities. Why? Because it has infinite perspective. And now, in order to see from limited perspectives, what does it have to do? It has to hide and forget its unbounded perspective and see from a limited perspective. See from the limited perspective of an atom, of a molecule, of a cell, of a tree, of a cat, of a dog, of a human being, of a man, a woman, he, she, they, them, whatever. It wants to see from all these perspectives. And in order to do that, it has to hide its own essential nature as being infinite and unbounded. Otherwise, it would be cheating, because it wouldn't really seeing from a limited perspective. And so, to make a long story short, all of this that we have is that unbounded, infinite ocean of being hiding itself in us and experiencing from our limited perspective. And when it knows that, and it's gone through the story of all the possible limited perspectives, then it knows everything. Then it has known from unbounded perspective and limited perspective. And that is really all that there is. So one thing is very important and reassuring is that every one of us is supremely precious, because every one of us is revealing to that unbounded field of being one way of seeing, another way of experiencing, another way of perceiving. And that is why we are the joy, kind of that infinite field. Now, there is a small trap here, or caveat, if you like. And that is, in order for it to truly see from those limited perspectives have to have their own identity, their own ego, their own self, and therefore their own freedom to act and behave in the way that small perspective would act and behave. Why is that? Because if everything is 100% predetermined, then there is nothing to experience. It's no more the experience from a limited perspective. It becomes a fixed sequence of things. And since that absolute is beyond time and space, it can see all the story. And therefore, it won't be discovering anything. Therefore, freedom, and that's a very important part, freedom is a necessity for manifestation. Without freedom, there is no individuality. Without individuality, there is no experience from a limited perspective. Without experience from a limited perspective, there is no sense to manifestation at all. No purpose, no sense, nothing is gained. And therefore, Freedom is very important in this factor. However, where is the problem? The problem is that in freedom, you can choose anything within constraints. I won't go through this. In the book, I describe what the constraints are and how they emerge and what happens. There are constraints. You know, the atom can move only in certain degrees of freedom. The particle has only lesser degrees of freedom. The higher you grow in complexity and consciousness, basically, the more degrees of freedom you have. But then your scan of freedom can lead you in any direction. And that is why there is responsibility. That is why if you go in one direction towards discovering actually that you are the infinite unbounded ocean of consciousness, which is hiding within you, if you're going in that direction, you are going to grow in happiness and evolution and more fulfillment. If you retrograde and do the wrong things and discriminate and not have the sense of self and all of that, you might be going in a direction of lesser happiness. Now, this has implications on many, many aspects of our life. It has implications on how do we define what is good or bad. And in few words, what is good is what guides you towards discovering the self as being unbounded, to know yourself, and to know that everyone is that self. So that's what we call liberation or enlightenment or moksha in the ancient traditions that gave this knowledge, which means liberation from the limitation of being hiding to removing the hiding and discovering I am everything, I am totality. Know thyself to be that infinite unbounded ocean of being and discover that to be everything. And discover that everyone is that reality. That's what we call in the family of meditators who have learned the technique and have listened to advanced lecture, that's what we call unity consciousness, which is the highest level of consciousness that a human can attain, in which the human personal consciousness realizes, I am that field, I am that field, and also everything is that field. Everything is myself, that's why we call it unity consciousness. And live on that platform of wholeness, of true reality, whereas we were living in what we can call ignorance of the true reality. So this has implications on freedom, determinism, constraints, has implications on what is good, what is bad, has implications on why there is suffering, why there is problems, and the reason is basically because we have freedom, so we can choose anything we want, and that the force of nature is gonna keep guiding us to experience totality and wholeness and experience reality. And as we grow in that experience, our happiness grows. So true happiness grows with our growth ourselves and our understanding of wholeness and knowing that we are that wholeness, we are that totality. So these are the few points that are good to discuss. If you like more, I think I'll stop here. And I don't want to be a hard seller of my book. So in a very soft way, we'd like this knowledge to be known to everyone. We'd like this to be spread, because that is what tells us how we can solve the problems in society. We can solve them through consciousness. We know what to do for the environment. Why don't we do it? Because our consciousness is limited. We think of ourselves today, now, and me, and that's it. Whereas the reality is we are that consciousness. And if we raise our consciousness, then we will think of long-term, we will think of broader, embracing more of ourself, because everything is ourself, and we can expand our awareness and do it. So we know what to do, we don't do it because of what? Of fear, of limitations, because we are thinking from a fight or flight response in a simple, limited, narrow way. We are facing artificial intelligence, which is going to be much more intelligent in terms of data collection and data analysis and all of that. Are we going to guide it in the right direction? Are we going to make it something useful for our growth? And it's not the physical world that's going to answer that. It's our consciousness. Our consciousness as human beings, as individuals, and as collective consciousness goes. And therefore, we have to raise our consciousness right now in a very important and necessary way so that we can guide artificial intelligence to become a helpful tool for humanity rather than a potential risk for disturbance and disruption in a negative way and challenge to our well-being and life on Earth. And like this, there are many implications, and that's why we are passionate to make this knowledge known, and that's why I'm asking you to support the launch of this book so that if it is known and if people understand the value of consciousness and they practice techniques of consciousness and they raise collective consciousness, we have something very important to offer to ourselves and the society as a whole. Thank you very much.
Our first question. Some people feel that love is the essence of everything. How does this understanding jive with consciousness is all there is?
Love is an expression of what unifies, what puts together. And the force that actually allows different aspects of consciousness that come together to experience bigger level of consciousness is love. So love is part of the dynamics of manifestation that allows us from the particle level to come into an atom. So for me, love is when two particles or a few particles come together and they feel as one and they are the atom. And love is when many atoms come together and they create a molecule. And when many molecules come together, create a cell. All this binding and unity, I feel as one with you, is love. And that goes on through the whole field of manifestation. When we come together and we feel as one, this is what love is. Whether it's a family or whether it's a friendship, whatever it is, the sense of unity in diversity is love. And that is the force of evolution that comes naturally from the process of growing in consciousness.
As a follow-up related question, primarily when we think of consciousness, we focus on the mind. Neurons are present throughout the body. How does TM expand heart consciousness?
Heart consciousness.
Heart consciousness.
Refer to my previous answer. What TM does is removes the obstacles that allows us to see, that make us see the other as different from us. That is by transcending. When we transcend the ego and go to the self, the big self with a big S, and know we are the ocean, then the ocean looks at the waves and sees them as part of itself, rather than being on the surface and seeing my wave and your wave, they are different and they're going to clash together, and what's going to happen, and therefore I'm afraid of you, you're afraid of me, I don't want to get near you, I don't want to be unified with you. That is because we are seeing from a very surface perspective. Transcending is going to the ocean and depths of the ocean and looking at the waves and seeing them all as myself. And when you see everything as yourself, then that is truly unbounded, unlimited love.
You've already started to provide an answer to these next two questions, but I'm going to ask them anyway. One asks, if consciousness is all there is, and most world religions describe their God as omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, suggesting unbounded awareness, are we humans perhaps all craving the same thing, only in various degrees of awareness and devotion? And then a question I'm pairing with this. How can this paradigm unite all the different cultures that have their own system to connect with the same consciousness, which is the same for everyone regardless of practice? So maybe you could speak more to this unifying point. And also I'm curious if there's something on what will happen. Do you have a theory of what will happen to the differences? All of these different religions, knowledge, and ways of living one's life.
So differences are a joy. As we know, it's part of the reason for manifestation, is to see from all these different perspectives, to experience from these different perspectives. So if you eliminate differences, you eliminate the reason for manifesting, for existing. So differences would never have to be eliminated, but they all have to grow on the field, on the understanding of the unity underlying the differences. So differences are one aspect, but the reality, the ultimate reality, is a unity field of being that we are within us. And so when you see differences from this perspective, then there is no clash between differences, and there is absolutely no reason to eliminate differences. Differences can be enriching to each other if they are based on this understanding of unity underlying all differences. Now, if we go to the concept of divine and God and all that, which we said we would avoid to enter into because it becomes a belief system or it becomes a religion or a philosophy of a specific kind. But we can still accommodate, of course, and everyone can see that divine within themselves. In the range of possibilities of existence and perspectives, you have the infinite perspective. And that infinite perspective, if it sees from all points of view and experiences from all points of view, including the unbounded point of view, now you might choose to say this is a supreme level of consciousness. And you might give it different names based on your culture or your background or your belief. And that can be accommodating that value of the divine within it. There is no contradiction. Because one thing we can say, whatever you imagine God to be must be a conscious being. Can you imagine a God which is unconscious? So it's a conscious being. What consciousness would a God in our mind have? Supreme consciousness. So there is a supreme consciousness. It's accommodated. It's part of the why not? And then it becomes a question of almost semantics and naming and looking at it from different perspectives. Now, that is omniscience, that is omnipresence, because it's everywhere, it's in everything, it's seeing everything at the same time. We can go further in this, but I'll leave it at this point.
This next question is very practical. What does one do when you feel like every experience seems to be a series of roadblocks? A lot of almost, but not quite.
Well, life is not happening to us, that which what we would think. Life happens for us. This is important. At every step in your life, you would be best to see that it's happening for you. There are circumstances that happen. You have to face them, and you see how you can best face the challenges. And that is what will help us grow and develop also. And it's not that we're looking for challenges, but situations and circumstances will always happen, and it depends from which platform we meet them. And when we teach transcendental meditation, one of the things that the teachers say is, don't be a football of situations and circumstances. So don't be pushed around and kicked around by situations and circumstances. Situations and circumstances will always happen. What you need is to anchor yourself in yourself. And then you become what we call master of your destiny. You take your life in your own hands. And people who practice transcendental meditation regularly and have good rest and routine, they see what we call actually support of nature, which means things start happening for them in a more easy way. There is a support there. So when one is tired and not eating well, not sleeping well, and like that, it's more likely to face issues, and the issues become like a big mountain. When one is rested and well stable within oneself, even think of the day you wake up and you have had a good night's sleep and you are fresh, suddenly things seem to happen in a better way, and whatever happens is no more a mountain, it's just a small thing that you can deal with. So become bigger and the problems become smaller.
Okay, we have a couple questions here. I'll read them out, but I think they can be summarized also by this question of what is consciousness? One question is, where did the field of consciousness which preceded the Big Bang come from? And another one, are inanimate objects aware of themselves? Is awareness the same as consciousness?
So, consciousness is not physical or material, and it is therefore not within the scope of space and time. Physicality and materiality are within the scope of space and time. Because when you say something is material or physical, it means you can locate it at this place, at this time. And therefore you can say, where did it come from? What was there before it? But consciousness is not a physical field, and it is beyond space and time. So space and time did not exist before the Big Bang, as we take this example. And that also is said between quotation marks, because there are fine details to discuss about that. But it's complicated to go through that. But let's say before the Big Bang, the question is, was there ever before the Big Bang? And again, it's another question. But if we use the metaphor, before anything existed, what was there before? There was a reality that is not limited by space and time. And therefore, you cannot ask the question, what was there before it? Because there was no time. What was there next to it? Because there is no space. And another thing is, it is nothing in terms of physical reality. So if you say, what was there before nothing? Well, nothing. There was nothing, and nothing is nothing. And it doesn't come from anywhere and doesn't go anywhere. Nothing physical. So it has a quality of consciousness, but it's beyond our paradigm of physicality and world being lived in time and space. It's actually one of the explanatory powers of the paradigm, that it explains how we can solve the problem of what was there before, what will be there after.
Can consciousness know the consciousness of another person?
Say it again.
Can consciousness know the consciousness of another person?
It depends which consciousness. If it's a limited consciousness, it knows only that much. So when one is drowsy, one sees another person, we assume their consciousness, but if we are drowsy, we don't see what they are experiencing, what they're feeling. If we are clear in our mind and you see the other person, you can say this person is today happy, or the person has had some good news. You can say that the person has had some bad news. There is something worrying them. You can experience that. And so this quality of consciousness you can experience based on your quality of consciousness also. I usually take the example, if you throw a big rock in a stormy ocean, the rock is swallowed and you don't see anything. But if you touch the surface of a settled, quiet pond, even by little touch, you can see the waves. And so if your mind is like an ocean agitated, you will not be able to see many things. You pass by people, you don't feel them, you don't experience them, you have nothing. You are just in your own ocean of storm, your mind in a storm. But if your mind is settled, then any vibration, anything you can detect, you can feel the other more. You are more sensitive to things. Sensitive means sensible also. And not sensitive means you get yourself affected. To the contrary, you are well anchored in yourself. But this is how one has either higher intuition, higher feelings of others. But in terms of technicality, in terms of seeing somebody else's consciousness, you cannot see it because it's not at the level of the experience through the senses. But as you grow in consciousness, you have more and more refined sensory perception. We call it refined sensory perception, where you see finer levels of reality and therefore can appreciate different levels of consciousness. Another aspect of this question is, can we tell somebody else's state of consciousness, if they are enlightened or not? And that is very, very unfathomable, because we cannot judge consciousness only through the outer experience of physical things. Somebody might be going through something, but they have a higher state of consciousness. So you cannot be sure what state of consciousness another person is.
Is it possible to change the physical aspect of an object through consciousness?
See, this is a question also of importance. Is, for example, people who pretend they can bend the spoon and like that through consciousness, and we know that this is not the case, that there are tricks and magical tricks, that they use kind of special metal or visual things. Now, can you actually have something happen in the physical world based on your consciousness? One thing we know is collective consciousness influences the behavior of people, and we have studied the changes in accidents of the road, hospital admission, crime, and conflict through the change in consciousness. So that is a real change. Now, whether we can fly through the sky or transform something into something else, well, the possibility is there, but it requires a development of individual and social consciousness to come to a point where this can become possible. So it's not because it's not happening right now that it's not possible, and it's not because it is possible that we have to use this as a proof that consciousness is primary or not. Which means prove to me that consciousness is primary by transforming this apple into a banana. And I say, I cannot do it. And you say, okay, then consciousness is not all there is. Well, first, your consciousness has to develop, my consciousness has to develop, the social consciousness has to develop in order for what we see as reality to be accepted as potentially real. Otherwise, it will be a jump and a jerk and in the states of consciousness, which cannot be is not necessarily helpful for understanding what life is about and what is limited, what is unlimited.
We're curious about the superpowers. That's why we wanted to ask. When we don't recognize our nature as consciousness and violate laws of nature, is this the result of too much constraint or too much freedom?
It's both. It's both. The freedom of today is the constraint of tomorrow. If you plant an apple seed, you will get an apple tree. So you have constraints. So when you come to eat mango and you find apples, you can't say, oh, that's terrible. I have bad luck. You have planted the seed to get an apple tree. Now you still have freedom. You can take the apples and sell them in the market and buy mango. So then, even though your choice of yesterday limited you to apparently apples, but your wider consciousness can have a solution to transform the apple into mango, but it has a physical path to it. You know, you take the apples, you go to the market, or you call a friend that has mangoes, and you tell them, you have mangoes, you want apple? And say, yeah, good. And so bring your mango, and I give you the apple. And so suddenly you have mango from the apple tree. So it's really a question of consciousness, of freedom of thinking, of width of awareness. If you are narrow like this and you say, oh my God, the world is over, I wanted mango and I can only get apple, it won't be a good way to do it.
All right, we have several questions about transcendental meditation. I'm going to read a few of them together. One is, where does this knowledge come from? Does it relate to the Shankaracharya tradition? Another one is, who would you recommend transcendental meditation for? Specifically, would you recommend it for people with developmental disabilities or other neural conditions? And then one more question to keep in mind. How is it similar or different to something like Dr. Joe Dispenza's technique to achieve consciousness using guided meditation and music to get to the quantum field? Is that similar to TM? What are your thoughts?
TM comes from the yoga tradition and is described as the mental technique for yoga. Yoga is the settling of the reverberations of the mind. In Sanskrit, it says yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is when the mind settles down and all the vibrations of the mind settle down, so you go to the ocean of consciousness. It is described in the ancient Vedic literature also, in the Bhagavad Gita, in different parts. And the way it is practiced comes from a tradition that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi has brought to the West and taught it in a systematic way by teachers that he has trained, so there is a very systematic way. It is different from all mental techniques that deal with contemplation or concentration or manipulating the mind or trying to guide the mind in one direction or the other. For example, mindfulness says that you should be mindful of, for example, your breathing, and you close the eyes and just observe your breathing, how it's going, where it's going, and take a neutral attitude towards thoughts or observe your thoughts. So these techniques, they help to settle down from the agitation of the surface of the mind, but they're still on the guided towards manipulating not in a negative way, but guiding, let's say, the mind in specific directions. Whereas transcendental meditation allows us to use the nature of the mind, which is to go towards more charming things. For example, if you're reading a book and the book is not so interesting and the music starts next door, your mind shifts its attention from the lines on the book to the music. And you don't make any effort to go there. You don't have to force the mind or manipulate the mind or tell the mind to go anywhere. Your eyes are still reading, but you realize you're not on the book, you are on the music. And that shift is a natural shift, which is guided by the nature of the mind to always search for more. And so this is what we use in transcendental meditation, and guiding the attention inward. And since inward is more than the most, we have just said it's the unified field, it has everything, it's the ocean of being, then the mind will naturally dive towards that level. We need small tricks so that as it dives, it remains awake in a non-directed way. That's why how we teach the program of transcending. And everyone can benefit from it. Of course, one has to have a minimum of understanding what the teacher is saying and ability to practice the technique. And we have great experts here that are always ready to teach in the community.
Just want to check with you, are you comfortable taking more questions?
Yeah, a couple more maybe.
Okay, a couple more. I think a number of folks in the audience were at a 10,000 course in India with a group practice of transcendental meditation. And there were some questions around if there's any research done or scientific evidence coming out of those large assemblies of people practicing together.
We have the research being done. You know, when we did the study in Washington, it took a year and a half to collect the data from the public, you know, data that studies conflict and changes and all of that. We've had studies on EEG between different participants and even participants who were outside the group. For those who don't know, in end of December and beginning of January of this year, we were 10,000, 11,000 people together in India from 139 countries and practiced this for creating peace and harmony in the world. And our main intention that we have declared is to make this group permanent, because the research has shown when a square root of 1% of the population of a country or even the world practices this program together morning and evening, the effects are on the whole society. And with the 8.1 billion about the population of the world, 9,000 people would have been enough. So we collected 10,000 to make it on a safer level. But we have declared from the beginning that our intention is for the group to be permanent and to create a permanent group, which was Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of Transcendental Meditation's desire based on the findings and the research that this kind of group practicing the program together on a permanent basis can have a very positive influence on society. So this is why the question has come. And we've done research on even genetic level, etc., but the blood samples are still being analyzed, or they haven't even started to come to the laboratories. They are stored and they will be analyzed. There are many, many studies that will be coming hopefully out of that. But our intention, as we said, is to have a permanent group. And that intention has been completely fulfilled in an amazing way, where a group of spiritual leaders in India has looked at the research, and they actually are teaching now their students and their followers transcendental meditation and its advanced techniques, the TM-Siddhi program, and they're doing it at their own cost with their own people, whereas we were really trying hard to find, you know, large sums of money to support 10,000 people in one place doing the program morning and evening. And so this is, in my mind, the best result, even if something good happened for a few days during the course, it's not satisfactory as such, because what we want is to create an effect that is global and that is permanent. And this is in the works, it is happening, and that's why we feel this course was a great success.
We have two more questions for you. The first is, these two are related. When our lives come to a close, does our consciousness continue to exist? And is there current research that links near-death experiences with research into consciousness?
It continues to exist according to our paradigm, because when we create a ripple in consciousness, that ripple is ourself, and we have action and reaction, which remains the case. So the laws of nature remain active. It's not that we eliminated the physicality of the world. We're just explaining how this physical universe comes about from consciousness, but all the laws of physics and chemistry and behavior and psychology, all of these remain, and they remain important to study and work with and all of that. We're not saying just reject everything. Everything has to be, we have to build things, we have to get educated, we have to act on all of these different levels. But whenever we create a wave in the ocean, that wave has to be having its effect and has its cause that created it and has to continue. So when the body drops, doesn't mean that the effect of our existence has stopped. And therefore, consciousness continues, and according to the paradigm, it continues in a different form. Those who believe in reincarnation, it means one has to come back. Who don't believe in reincarnation, then it has to settle itself in some other realm. Whatever you believe in, we don't necessarily go into that, not to oppose or seem to give an understanding that is different from any belief system. But according to the paradigm, yes, it continues until it is fully established on its own level. So when we say consciousness, there is pure consciousness and there is personal individual consciousness. So personal individual consciousness can take different forms even without the body. Near-death experiences are very interesting phenomena that have been very strongly documented. What does it mean for reality? This is still open to research and documentation. And there are scientists who are doing very solid research on it, even studying the electroencephalography of people who go into this. And according to some studies, it seems these experiences happen when the brain is at a minimal state, which means almost on a flat line, which means there is almost no activity, and the person is for some reason revived, and during those periods the person is experiencing out-of-body experience or traveling through a tunnel or seeing certain things or their life going through their whole memory system and all of that. And so we cannot use this as a proof, but it is a very interesting phenomena to keep looking into.
All right. This person says, in the Book of Joy, Bishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama discussed how one can experience true joy in the midst of oppression and despair. Their conclusion was by engaging in the service of others. Where is engaging in the service to others in ultimate consciousness in the world?
Yeah, this is very important. And see, this is how the paradigm has explanatory power, really. It means it explains that ultimately the purpose is to grow into unity consciousness. That's what we say, because in unity consciousness, you realize you are the ocean, and you realize the other is that same ocean, and you are in unity consciousness. And this grows when your actions are also in the direction of greater unity. So service to others means, in other words, simply accepting others as part of yourself. You take other, because everyone would feel, I want to protect myself, I want not to suffer, I want to be well, I want to be this, I want. And when you see somebody who is in need or somebody who is in suffering, and you extend your eye to them, and by saying, oh, I don't want that person to suffer, which means I want them to have the right things. I want them to experience the right thing. So service unifies. Service means simply you take others as part of yourself. And that is growing in the self. Yourself grows. Yourself grows. It's no more me in my limited perspective. But my me starts to open up. It's also my friend. It's also my wife, my children. It's also my relatives. But it's also my society. It's my world. It's my environment. So your self grows. And when you care about this, then you care about this bigger self. And that is how, in this paradigm, you grow in expanding the sense of self by service, by devotion, by love, by care. And that is what we call right and good and in the right direction. And now we can explain it on this basis of this paradigm. It's not anymore just a moral forcing something. You have to do it because it's right to do it, but you don't feel like doing it. Well, anyway, if you don't feel and you do it, it's better than not to do it. So for whatever reason you do it, it's good. But what it does, it cultures in you the expansion of the self. And that expansion of the self, when you take everyone as myself, then you are growing on the right path, and that gives you more joy and happiness at the same time. So it pays well also.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.